Welcome to Pro Audio Profiles. My name is Brendan Decora, and each week I'll be hosting different guests, mainly engineers and producers, but also people from across the industry. Enjoy the show. On this week's show, we have Steve Genewick. He has credits with Paul McCartney, Melody Gardot, and Elvis Costello. Enjoy. So, first and foremost, I want to thank you for being here. For sure. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad we could finally make it happen.
Yeah, we've been trying to plan it for a little while.
Yeah, life gets busy.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to start out with a little bit of your backstory. If you can walk through, how you got to where you are.
It's pretty simple. I was a really rotten guitar player, but I had friends in bands and that kind of stuff, and I always enjoyed the music, liked the music, wanted to be part of it, but I knew I was never going to be the guy in the band. And then the idea of pushing road cases and being like a roadie, that didn't really appeal to me.
Right.
But so I was like, well, I'll be the sound guy.
Yeah.
And then I got into it, and because I didn't do the band thing, I didn't have the 4-track recorder and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
The typical story you hear all the time. So I had to start from the scratch. I knew absolutely nothing about recording.
Yeah.
But it seemed like a cool job. So I actually did go to a recording school.
Okay.
Very early on, it was a place called the Trebas Institute. It's obviously not there anymore.
Huh.
And it was not like the schools are now, but it was good. So I got the book education.
Right.
This is what an EQ does. This is what a compressor does. This is signal flow. Blah blah blah. Stuff
Right.
like that. And then I grew up in LA, so I kind of had I'd been around music and film people a little bit, not a lot, but I kind of knew the thing was, especially at that time, we're talking about the late 80s, you get a job as a runner, as a gopher, and
right.
That's how you get in the door, and you work, and there were hundreds of studios within 5 miles of my house
right.
at that time.
Yes.
At that time, every other building was a recording studio in Hollywood. There were tons
right.
of them. And the guy it was actually Bobby Osinski was one of my teachers.
Oh wow!
And I was literally in his class, and the guy who sat next to me in that class, we were kind of friendly. He was the night runner at a studio called Cherokee, which is the original Cherokee is no longer there.
Yeah, I worked there for a little bit actually.
So he would, everybody worked there for a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. He was the night runner guy. And he came in one day and told me that he had done something stupid and he got fired. And I was like, really? So they're looking for somebody? And he was like, yeah, dude, you should go get the job. And I literally got up and walked out of class and went home and got my resume and went to the studio and walked in. And I was like, I know you guys need somebody, here's my resume. I don't know shit. And they were like, great. When can you start? And I was
Nice.
like, when do you need me? They said, come back at 4. So I did that.
Same day.
And then I became, exactly. I became, a runner and blah, blah, blah. I think I worked there for 3 years.
Wow.
So 1990 to 93.
Okay.
And I made it through to assistant engineer, It was really fun. We had 5 rooms, so there were always sessions going on. And it was, at that time, it was either hard rock stuff, gangster hip hop stuff, because that was the early days of that, or Rod Stewart,
right.
the legacy artists that had been working there forever.
Yeah.
So it was fun. Got to do a lot of different stuff. Got to learn. I didn't know any different, so whatever was going on there was just it was cool.
Right.
Made some really good friends, people who are still my friends to this day.
Nice.
So I worked there for 3 years, and then I started doing live sound for bands because it was something to do.
Okay.
And it was a way to get into the bars for free and get free beer. And so I was doing that for a little while, and I thought that's what I was going to do, touring and go on the road and do that kind of stuff. And I ran into my friend Bill Smith, who you probably know.
Yeah.
And Bill and I had worked together at Cherokee, and I ran into him one night, and I was leaving a bar, and he was going in, and he was like, "Come here, I got to talk to you." He was like, he had gotten the job at Capitol like a year before.
Okay.
And he was like, he's like, I'm glad I ran into you. I got to talk to you. We had a guy who quit today. He quit really unexpectedly, blah, blah, blah. They need a person really bad. And I was like, I'm kind of having fun. I'm traveling a little bit and going on the road and doing this. And he was like, no. And he sat me down and he kind of explained Capitol to me.
Right.
Like, this is not like Cherokee. This is a totally different place. You're going to,
Right.
So like that night, he basically convinced me to go get the job. He was like, get your resume, go in tomorrow. This is the guy you got to talk to, talk to Michael Frondelli. He's the guy. He's the boss. So same kind of thing. I went in the next day and asked for Michael, and he came out for some reason. It's funny. I lived in LA my whole life. I'd never been inside the building.
Right.
I'd passed by it a billion times, never been inside.
Yeah.
Like everybody, basically.
Yeah.
Walked into the lobby and I said, I'm here to see Michael. And he came out, which I don't know why, know. And I said, I know you need a guy. Here's my resume. And he said, how do you know I need a guy? Because it was literally the day before the guy had quit. I said, well, I ran into Bill last night and he told me, and here's my resume. And he went, hang on a minute, just wait here.
Okay.
He went down to Bill and was like, who the hell's this guy? And Bill was like, he's good, hire him, So he came back up and he's like, when can you start? And I was like, well, when do you need me? And he was, be back here at 4:00. Okay, great. So I went back at 4:00.
That's awesome.
Because that's when the night shift starts. It's 4 to midnight at all the studios, right? Yeah. So I started back as a setup person at Capitol, which is basically the runner. But at Capitol it was a little different because we actually set the rooms up. So you're setting up the big orchestras and all that, hanging mics. So it was a little more than just getting food.
Yeah.
You had to know a little bit more. You had to know the microphones and stuff like that. So, so I started at Capitol, and then I just left 27 years later.
Jeez.
So, and then everything in between that,
Nice.
Yeah, I was there were guys that were there. They had, the engineers that were there at the time was Leslie Ann Jones and Charlie Picari and Pete Dell and Bill. I mean, some of them had been there for years, and I remember thinking, God, one job for 10 years, that doesn't sound right. I made it longer than all of them.
Right. And you're, obviously you worked with Al Schmidt a lot. Can you tell me how you got introduced to him and how that worked out?
So obviously working at Capitol, Al worked there all the time. And Bill was Al's assistant. By the time I got there, Bill was kind of working with Al all the time. Mm-hmm. And because Bill was my friend, I got introduced very quickly. I think I met Al. I think I had been there maybe a week, and he came in to do a big, huge Willie Nelson out. I'll never forget, because it was the first time I had to set up this big orchestra by myself.
Right. Okay.
2 rooms and tons of mics and all that stuff. And then, I met Al. Obviously I knew who he was, and I had been prepped Al's coming, and it was Willie Nelson and Jimmy Bowen. I had worked with some big people before that at Cherokee, but this was at Capitol, it was big time stuff. I'd never seen big orchestras like that, anything like that. So, and also at that time, we're talking 94, I think, when I started there. Most of the sessions, you can't do it with an engineer and an assistant. There were tape machines and DATs running and half-inch tapes and people. So, you always needed a few people in the control room. Right. And because I knew Bill, I got dragged in with him because we were friends.
Nice.
And Al and I hit it off immediately, mostly talking about baseball. We're both big Dodger fans.
Nice.
So I think that's... And I think our personalities kind of clicked. And so for 3 or 4 years, maybe even more, when they would do records, if they needed another person, it was me.
Right.
I would be the guy that was there. But Bill was still Al's assistant. He was doing all the heavy lifting and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And by that time, Capitol, we had rebuilt Studio C, and Al he was doing a lot of mixing at Bill Schnee's, but Bill's console was getting too small. Right. Obviously he needed bigger consoles and stuff like that. And it just became very comfortable for Al to stay at Capitol. It was easy for him.
Right.
The rooms were great. I mean, it's easy for everybody at Capitol.
Yeah.
It was great, but he could
Right.
record in those rooms and then go mix in C, and everybody was there, and he had a good parking lot, and the food was good, and blah blah blah. It was, and then it came time for Bill. His time with Al kind of ran its course, and he had other opportunities. Mm-hmm. And by that time, he was no longer on staff, and I had been promoted to assistant engineer, mostly because of Elliot Shiner, actually.
Okay.
Because Elliot was coming out mixing records, and he liked working with me. So I was actually, Elliot's the person that got me promoted.
Nice.
Because he was like, I want to do this record with Steve. And they were like, well, he's not an engineer here. You can't. And he was like, well, make him an engineer. So they made me, I had to join the union and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So it was actually Elliot that got me promoted to assistant engineer at Capitol.
Right.
But then it came time. So I remember Bill telling me, like, I'm not going to do this with Al anymore. I'm going to go do this record with these guys and blah, blah, blah. So you're probably going to be the guy. So it was kind of like Bill left, and I just moved over a chair and kept going with Al, because I had been working with them already for a while. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of lucky because at that time, Al and I always got along, but that was right when Pro Tools showed up.
Oh, really? Okay.
So suddenly the job of assistant engineer changed quite quickly.
Right.
Because, we always ran the tape machine and that kind of stuff, but there was a big difference between loading a tape on the machine and writing a track sheet and having to manage this Pro Tools thing.
Yes, absolutely.
And having to learn it and having to, it was something Al didn't, obviously he knew what Pro Tools did, but he wasn't going to sit down and edit and do file management and build sessions and all that kind of stuff. Like he'd stop and start and hit record. I mean, he knew what it did, but he had no interest in learning, to be an operator.
The full details.
So to speak.
Yeah.
We taught him, we showed him, here's how you navigate. So I didn't have to sit with him when he was mixing, he could navigate around and do all that kind of stuff, but he didn't want to learn how to edit and do all that kind of stuff. So suddenly the job of being Al's assistant changed a little bit. And I was at Capitol. I had a union job. I was getting paid. I had benefits. I had, it was cool. I was working on these huge records, mostly with Al or Elliot Shiner. Mm-hmm. I was assisting for the best guys in the world. I was doing movie sessions and scoring and, orchestral sessions and big band sessions and all this stuff that I never, I thought I was going to make rock and roll records and do guitars and, and here now I'm making jazz records and and I really liked it. It was, so I was having a good time and I was making a living.
Yeah.
And I had I had a young family and whatever. And Al and I just kept working. So then it got to the point where I was Al's guy and Al was at Capitol all the time. And I was giving Paula my schedule, because Al, we were booked 6 months out,
right?
With records, and it was just assumed that if Al was there, I was there,
right? And
if he wasn't there for some reason, then I got to work with Jeff Emmerich or Elliot Shiner or whoever.
Right.
Sometimes I get parted out to other Al. I'm not working. You're gonna go work with Glenn Johns this week. Okay, great. I'll do that.
Right.
And so we just kind of kept going. Mm-hmm. And then, then it was 20 years, pretty much.
Nice.
That we worked together almost every day. Yeah. Towards the end, the last 5 or 6 years, he started working a lot less by design. Mm-hmm. He was getting older and just didn't, he just stopped taking the gigs he didn't want to do, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
But by that time, I had my own clients, and I had already established myself. So as his career was kind of winding down a bit, not much, I just kept working.
Right.
So, I never really got his clients, so to speak.
Yeah.
A few of them maybe, but
right.
But again, that 20 years I spent with him was the best education I could have ever gotten.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that was a couple times where you guys had come over to East West, and I was working with you guys, and it was awesome to work with you and Al together. It was really cool. Yeah, for sure. It
became a very special thing between the two of us because, again, we worked together so long and we knew each other so well. And it, it got to the point where there was stuff I did and stuff he did, and we didn't even have to talk about it. It would just happen.
Right.
And I picked up a lot of his demeanor. His way of working was very much stay out of the way, just capture what's there. It was never about him. It was about the artist and the music and the session and all that. And I fell in. It was very much. I liked that. It worked for me also. And I like to think I'm still that way. It's not about me. It's right. I'm just there to capture what's going on. So yeah, we got along. And I mean, like I said, there were times where entire sessions would go on. We wouldn't have to talk to each other. Yeah. I used to tell the other assistants at Capitol, like, don't do what I do. Like, if you see me doing, like, it's not okay. Like, right. You can't reach over and change a compressor setting on the, like, I can do that with him because I know, we have this understanding. But please don't look at me in a session with Al and think that that's okay. Right. And I would never do that with other people.
Of course.
Unless it was somebody I knew. Right. And then it was cool because then as I got better and I was at Capitol for a long time, and then I would get requested by, for the big session, the Oscars and stuff like it was like, no, we got to have Steve there because he's the guy that can manage this stuff. So it was really fun working at Capitol because we were doing sessions that nobody else did. Right. We were doing live broadcasts and, stuff like that. And it was really fun. Hey, we're going to do a live broadcast with Paul McCartney and his band. Cool. Let's do that.
Right.
Right. Who wouldn't want to do that?
Exactly.
So
then now what have you been doing lately? You're doing stuff at home. What's your status?
Yeah. So COVID hit, which stopped everything.
Right.
So I always, at one point, when Pro Tools came around and you could suddenly put it on your laptop, and I had a little studio that had evolved at my house. Okay. I didn't do it on purpose. I never really wanted it, but I could do this little editing, and friends were, I can do this at home. I don't have to go in for this. And, then somebody's, can you mix this record? It's a little thing. I was like, I guess I can do this on my laptop, with headphones. It was like, it's acoustic guitar or whatever. So I had this little room, kind of in a little office area. And then I started getting some work. I would do these jazz, I call them little jazz records, not little. They're just inexpensive,
Right.
But I could mix it at home. Right. And it was like, so it was a little extra money here and there, and I was getting clients and stuff like that. So people that couldn't afford to go to Capitol, maybe I could do it at my house.
Right.
So I never took work from Capitol, but it was like, look, these people, they have, $2,000 to mix this entire album.
Right.
Well, I can do that in 2 days. I can, 3 days of my time. That's a good living. Right.
But
that's not even the studio. That's not even one day in the studio at Capitol. Yeah. So I had this little studio that did that. And then COVID hit and lockdown. And by that time I had been mixing Atmos and, like I said, Al had kind of not, where I used to spend 90% of my time with Al, I was now spending like 30% of my time with Al. Right. And I had my own clients and stuff like that. So when COVID hit, and lockdown happened, and my wife said, it was like, well, I got to keep working. And there was all this Atmos work from the studio, because at that time it was all internal still. There were only like 3 of us who were mixing in Atmos. And I cobbled together a bunch of speakers. I had I got a pair of speakers here and a pair of speakers there and a pair of speakers there. And, and they were like, can you get set up and running? And I was like, yeah, I think I can. And my wife was like, well, you should just take the living room because we're not using the living room.
Okay.
We have a big family room in the back. So we basically took my little studio office and put the living room furniture in there and put my studio in the living room. And I could keep working, which was great. And I had the work. So I couldn't go, you couldn't go to studios. I had internet. I had a computer suddenly, and I had access to other rooms. It's kind of nebulous, but PMC had a room in Highland Park that nobody was at. Yeah. So what I could do is, because I had already mixed so much Atmos work, they could send me the work. I could mix it. So I would mix for like a week. I'd get like 14, 15 songs, whatever. And then I could go to the PMC studio in Highland Park that nobody had been at. So it was perfectly safe and COVID rules and all that stuff. and listen to everything and tweak it on a real system.
Nice.
And then turn it in.
Nice.
You know, but the studio couldn't send me to a studio for legal reasons, obviously.
Right,
it was like
right.
they couldn't send, you know.
That's
so they would be
crazy.
like, "Is this good?" I'm like, "It's fine. Don't worry about it." They're like, "How did you?" I'm like, "Don't ask me how I did it. But it's good. You can release it."
Right.
I mean, they knew exactly what was going on. But
Yeah.
So that's what I did during COVID. And then there were a couple records we were working on that like got stopped in the middle of it.
Right.
And I was able to keep working, you know, like we all did over Zoom and all that kind of stuff. But because I had this rig at my house, I was able to keep working. And then when the studios reopened, it was like, well, if I don't have to go in, I'm not driving 45 minutes to, you know, I'll just keep working here. And they were like,
Right.
fine, because I had an Atmos room at that time at Capitol, there were 5 of us mixing and we had 2 Atmos rooms. So it was
Okay,
like, well, if you can stay home and work, that's great. Because then the other guys, you know, so I would do the
Right.
same thing. I would mix at home and then go into the studio 1 or 2 days a week and listen to everything
Right.
and tweak it, and off it went.
Nice.
So that was working great. You know, so I just
Nice.
kept the studio in the living room. And then we found out about Capitol, the building needing to be, you know, retrofitted, earthquake retrofit.
Right.
So we were actually in the middle of union negotiations, and they went, well, hang on, we have news for you. So we knew about the building
geez.
closing way before everybody else did.
Right.
You know, I mean, we
right.
knew months in advance, but we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know what was going to happen with us. We didn't know, like, are we being kept on? Are we going to move? Is it going to be a year? Is it going to be what, you know? And as it started to unfold, you know, we kind of realized, and then again, I had the studio at my house. I could keep working. So we were dismantling Capitol because, you know, we stopped taking, at one point we stopped doing sessions because we had to empty the rooms. And that took literally months.
Took all the gear out and everything. Wow.
Everything. The only thing we left was the frames of the consoles and like the internal wiring, like the patch bays, but like speakers out of all the soffit mounted speakers are gone. And it all had to be packed up, you know, itemized,
That's
you know,
crazy.
barked. Like,
I didn't know that. I thought they just closed the doors.
It was we had to. So it took months. During that time, I kept working.
Right.
Because they still needed all these records mixed in Atmos.
Right.
And I had an Atmos room. So I got to keep working. And then they finally told us, like, look, this is what's going to happen. And the staff's going to be laid off and you're all going to get, you know, a severance package. And it was cool the way it happened. But I just kept working. Then, you know, but again, we knew that. So I had 6 months, you know, or whatever, 4 months, knowing that at some point this was going to happen. And, you know, my kids had grown up and moved out. So I still have a studio in my living room.
Nice.
Yeah. Now it's my studio, you know, and again, we have the rest of the house is great. My wife and I kind of decided we retrofitted a little bit. We put in a couple of doors and stuff like that. But it's easier for me to just work out of the house. So I have a full 714 Atmos system here at my house. I have PMC speakers that you can see. So it's been great. So I just kept working.
Awesome.
Yeah, I haven't stopped. Yeah.
Now all of us are kind of, you know, multifaceted. Some of us, you know, engineer, we produce, we mix, you do Atmos, you know. Is there one thing that you have been focusing on more lately, or kind of a little bit of everything?
A little bit of everything, and I like it that way. You know, I really enjoy mixing Atmos, but it's maybe half of what I do. I still enjoy recording. Like next week, I'm out all week. This week, I was home all week. You know, mixing, just sitting in this room by myself doing stuff. Next week, I'm out all week. I'm at East West next week. You know, making a record. So I still enjoy doing both. I love recording. Recording is still my favorite thing to do. Go to the studio, you get to see your friends and people. And, you know, you get to make music, and, you know, the records I get to record are usually fun. It's usually orchestral stuff, or, you know, I just produced a record for a band that's kind of a bar band kind of thing, you know, but they're really good. So like you know, kind of a rock country rock band. You know, I still do the little jazz records, which, again, not little, they're big, but, good artists and all that kind of stuff. But we do them quickly. They happen, record for 2 days and then mix for a day and then you're done.
Right.
So, I still, and then
nice.
I still have clients from Capitol and all that kind of stuff. It worked out very well for me, actually.
Okay. Nice.
So, and we'll see what happens when Capitol comes back. We'll see what happens. You know? I know they're working over there. They're doing work at some point. The studios will reopen. I know that.
Right. Right.
And I'm excited when they reopen. If nothing else, I get to use those rooms because I miss having the rooms and I miss having the mic locker and stuff like that.
Exactly. Nice.
What do you mean you don't have 18 U67s for me to use?
Right. Now, when you're mixing Atmos, what like a lot of the process of mixing Atmos is just recreating the old mix. If it's catalog stuff, you have to just recreate their mix. Like, what does that process look like for you?
Depends on what it is. It depends on what I'm given. So a lot of the stuff I've been doing recently is actually not catalog stuff. Okay. I've been doing a lot of like frontline records. I just did the new Nile Horn record. So that's I just did a Melody Gardot album.
Nice.
So in that case, I'm usually getting really good stems.
Okay. Nice.
So recreating the record is fairly simple.
Right.
Because it should just line. It doesn't always, depends on who mixed. It depends on who did the stereo mix.
Right.
Some guys use more bus processing than other people.
Exactly.
But now I know, I've mixed a bunch of stuff that Spike Stent was the original mixer on.
Right.
So I kind of know what I'm going to get, if Chris Lord Algae was the original mixer, whatever it is, like I'll kind of know, I've done it a few times and I kind of know what they use and that kind of spoken with people. And, so if it's that, then it's panning basically.
Right.
How do I move this around? Keep the integrity of the stereo record, the original record, but make it interesting. And it really depends on the album. I do a lot of the Blue Note catalog, and that's a whole different process. And with that jazz stuff, you don't want Miles Davis spinning around in circles and all that kind of stuff. So, so that gets treated much differently than a pop record, where you have all these elements and stuff like that. So, I don't have an assistant here, so a lot of my time, like yesterday, I basically prepped an entire album. I built the sessions and imported all my stuff. I mean, that takes the better part of a day to do 10 or 12 songs. It was a little easier because it was an album I mixed in stereo, so I'm kind of just conforming my sessions.
Yeah. That's actually one thing I wanted to talk about too is, I've done a bit of Atmos, but for me, it's always been stuff that I've mixed in stereo first. So it's a lot easier to make that transition. And sometimes, when I get lucky, there's projects that I'm kind of co-producing and I have the full liberty to, explore with Atmos much more than I did with the stereo version. Have there been projects like that with you or?
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, depends on the artist and the song and all that kind of stuff. But and I've gone through different ways of doing it, and I have lots of friends that are doing it, and we all commiserate. Like, do you print your own stems? Do you commit the tracks? And it's kind of different every time. I don't know that I found the best way to do it, but I always get through it.
Right.
So the records that my favorite thing is if I was the stereo mixer, then doing the Atmos. That's because to your point, you have where the bodies are buried, and what the artist wanted. What the intent was.
Exactly.
You were there for all the little tiny moves that were made, and you can make sure that stuff translates into the Atmos mix and all that kind of stuff. So that's my favorite thing to do. When you're dealing with especially catalog stuff, it's a lot harder because at that point, you may not have the artist around. You may not have the original producer around. Sometimes you do. If it's if it's a, I'll usually try to find out who mixed the original stereo version.
Right.
I try to make sure, we had issues early on where like we weren't getting, some of these records have been remastered 4 or 5 times.
Right.
If you're dealing with stuff from the 70s, like which master are we going after? Like, so, I literally had one album where I did the Atmos mix and they kept rejecting it, going, it's not right, something's wrong, and we figured out we were listening to 2 different reference tracks.
Oh, jeez.
Like they had one that was mastered in, like I had one that was mastered in the 70s and they had one that was mastered in the 90s or something like that.
Right.
So theirs was, it was not that, not that one was better than the other, but and stuff like one of them got reversed. So left and right were reversed.
Oh, really? Jeez.
So when they're hearing, they're like, why is this weird? This is,
Yeah.
And we but it took us like a week to figure out, because again, it was COVID and it was a British artist and we were going, so we had time zones and finally we got on the phone and we were like, what are you listening to? And it was, so there's that kind of stuff too, which was,
for sure.
Do we have all the multi-tracks? Do we have the right multi-tracks? We ended up at Universal at Capitol, we had set it up a whole thing of what we called pre-mixing, where we could send it to people who just did the busy work of, is this the right take? Is this the right vocal? Is this, do we have all the guitar parts?
Yeah.
Because if you're dealing with a 24 track that was transferred, well, not all, the tambourine goes through the whole song, but it's only used in the chorus. Like somebody has to go through and pick that out.
Sometimes they're automating the mutes to do the comps and stuff. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. You got 48, a 48 track. So you got a master and a slave, and which, like, there's guitar parts on both, which is the actual one to use, stuff like that.
Right.
So those kind of things, a lot of times with the catalog stuff, getting to the Atmos mix is the hard part. Yeah. Once you get to the point where you can actually do the mix, it's actually not that difficult.
Yeah, exactly.
But nice. It's all the stuff running up to it. And then all the stuff on the back end, because now it has to be approved, and who's going to approve it, and is the artist involved, is the producer involved, and sometimes that can be fun, sometimes it can be a little annoying. I've had artists that were like, I've hated that mix for 30 years, can you please change it?
Jeez.
Like the vocals,
but then the label's like, definitely don't change it, because
exactly, it doesn't sound like the original, but he told me to change it,
right.
So we have had some stuff like that,
right.
Like, can you please tune that word? It's been bugging me for, or whatever it is. But now we can fix it, so you tune it up. And now I would never do stuff like that on my own.
Of course,
I would only do stuff like that if I'm asked by somebody to do it. But there was some stuff in the '80s, from the '80s, and I talked to the artist before and they were like, "It sounds really '80s. Can you like back off on some of the reverb and stuff like that when you do this mix?" I'm like, yeah, cool, no problem.
Nice.
Not make it totally different, but let's just, can we loosen it up a little bit?
Tweaks.
Yeah. So
nice.
The fun part is when you whatever people think about Atmos and whatever you're doing, I've never had an artist not like it. Like, when you sit the artist down and play them, like, I've never had one go, oh, I hate this. This is ridiculous. I like, they might have opinions about the mix, but for the most part, they all like it.
That's cool.
Because it's cool. If it's done right, it's really good.
Yeah, definitely.
I will admit there's some really bad mixes out there. When the Apple thing came out, when Apple started streaming spatial, and I'm looking at forums and reading, because I was kind of on the front line of the whole thing, because I was the first one. Mm-hmm. I was actually the first mixer to mix music. So I'm reading, people are like, you ruined this record. Not me, but this record is bad. And I sat down one day with and I went through and I got my phone and listening to the binaural, and I was like, yep, that mix sucks. Yep, you're right, that mix sucks. Yep, that's a bad mix. You're right. Like, that one didn't translate. So, but the really good stuff is really good. So it's like anything. We're in such the early stages of it that we're all still figuring it out.
Yeah.
Exactly. I've been at it longer than anybody else, and I've only been doing it for 5 years tops.
Right.
6 years, whatever that is.
Nice.
And we had to make it up. There were no rules. There was no,
of course,
when you're learning to mix in stereo, you can listen to mixes that have been done by the best mixers in the world. When they handed me the first Atmos record, it was, how do I do this? And they were like, I don't know. Nobody's ever done it. You figure it out. So I was literally making it up as I went, but always with, I always have it in the back of my head, like, you're still mixing a record. This is not a demo to show off a lot of speakers. You're making a record, so make it compelling. Yes. You still have to be able to listen to it, and it still has to be music. And just because you can pan something to the back doesn't mean it needs to go to the back.
Right, for sure.
It really depends on what it is. You know, and luckily in the early stages, stuff wasn't. We were kind of getting a back catalog going, so it wasn't like I was mixing and it was being released. So there was some stuff we could experiment, and we could go back and fix stuff. If some of the early stuff, like, I went back to it before it got released and was like, no, we screwed that up. But like, that was bad. I gotta fix that.
Nice.
So there were a few like that.
Nice.
But and there were only a few of us doing it, so we had this little tiny community. And we could bounce ideas off each other, and it was very controlled. Right. It was really fun, actually. That's cool. Because again, it was just the people at Capitol and Dolby, and again, there were like 10 of us who were involved, right? Either technically or the record label, whatever. So it was really cool. Nice. So I think we got to do it in a very good way, where we could kind of control our own quality and stuff like that. And then by the time stuff started getting released, we had a pretty good back catalog going. And so then we at least had some stuff we knew sounded good. We'd heard it in other places, and the artist liked it. And, it was like, so, okay, these are the really good mixes. So shoot for this stuff.
Right. So, nice. Awesome.
Some that I did, some that other people did. Yeah, it's been really good. I'm really enjoying it. And I will agree that, again, like I said, there's some stuff that's just not good.
Right. So one thing I like to talk about on this podcast as well is, how to get great results from artists in the studio. And I know we touched on, Al Schmidt and how he's kind of got out of the way, and, you have taken on that approach as well. What are some of the things you do to prepare an artist for a session?
I prepare for the session, first of all. For me, and especially a lot of the records I do are like, quote unquote, live bands in the room kind of thing. Usually a lot of people, which is fun. So I'm prepared on that side. I have my shit together. I know the studio, and we've set up early, and I've checked the mics, and the headphones work, and all that kind of stuff. So that by the time the artists get there, none of that stuff should be happening. They should be able to walk in and go. Headphone mix is so important, getting the headphones right. I always used to make the joke that, the two most important parts of any recording session are the headphone mix and the lunch order, because those two things can destroy a session.
It's really true, honestly.
It's such a mood killer if either one of those things is screwed up. You saw it at East West a million times. If that headphone mix isn't right, people just get mad.
The whole session would come to a halt.
Exactly. And suddenly now the flow is killed. And on a lot of these sessions, if you're using union musicians or session music, you might only have 3 or 4 hours. So, we got 3 hours to get 3 songs. Like, let's go. We don't have time to screw around with the headphones. Like, and they know what they want, and, you better get it there. So, so for me, it's preparation, really, and making sure all that kind of stuff is taken care of, and then read the room. Some artists, you can be loud and talk, and and other artists, you just kind of sink back into the woodwork and let it happen. It depends on who the producer is too. Over the years, I as I did multiple records with different producers, I would feel a little better about saying something in a session, maybe, or, you always have to be careful with that, but, or do you just sit back and let it happen? You know,
Right.
who am I? You know, if I'm doing a session with David Foster, he doesn't need to hear my opinion about the chord structure of the song. He's David Foster. Like, you know, just record it. You know, that's not my place.
Right.
But I have had times where, you know, I was the most experienced person in the room.
Yes.
So, you know, I mean, everybody was great at what they were doing, but I was the one that's made hundreds of records, and, you know, these people have not made hundreds. So, and, you know, if something's going off the rails, I might have to step in and kind of put it back on track a little bit. Like, hey, guys, maybe we should start this, or maybe we should do that, or, you know, why don't we stop for a minute? You know, I mean, you have to do it in subtle ways.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because, you know, when you think about the artist, you know, very few artists have made hundreds of records. And so it's interesting to kind of, you know when to hold your tongue, but also offer advice to help them. And in a way that, you know, reinforces the fact that, you know, that you've done hundreds of records and they haven't, without offending them, you know? So it's this whole...
Without saying that.
Exactly. Yes. So it's this kind of walk you have to do.
Yeah, and that can be interesting sometimes.
Yeah.
You know? But like, I remember Al and I having talks about, like, we would be in sessions and he'd come over to me and be like, this isn't going well. Like, can we, you know, and it was like, okay. And suddenly, hey guys, I got to back this up. I need 10 minutes.
Right.
You know, we're getting to, you know, we could do something like that, or, you know, we could make up a thing to take, you know,
a break.
Again, I kind of wouldn't do that on my own, but you know, he was recognizing it, and he would like, well, how do we stop this? Like, we're going down a rabbit hole here, and this is not good. I'm like, you're right. I'll figure out a way to stop. Like, you know, so yeah, backing up is always a good thing to do. Like, or whatever. Like, let's get the lunch order going. You know, get a guy in here, and let's, you know. So sometimes you just have to change it up. So, and I think, again, it's reading the room and making everybody comfortable, and give them the place to do what they do best, to do what they're there to do. Right. You know, and help them. It's my job to help that artist make their record, or whatever it is, the movie or the, you know, it's not my record. It's never my record. Right. You know, like Al used to say, my name goes really small on the back if I'm lucky. You know?
Right. So. And on records that you've produced, is there any times where you've kind of helped to craft an artist's sound? How do you work with an artist to do that kind of thing?
No, most of the stuff I've been asked to produce is, again, it's more the kind of facilitation of getting it done. Okay. I mean, yes, I will. I mean, yeah, I will help, you know, even as an engineer, like, I'll help crafting the sound, but that's usually discussions beforehand and stuff like that. What kind of record are we going for here? Are we doing this live? Do we want it, you know, is this a big rock album where we need big rock drums? Is it a little thing, you know, are we going to do, a lot of it is dictated by how you record and who you record and where you record. I try to, especially now that I don't have capital at my disposal, you know, those rooms were so flexible. We could do all kinds of stuff. So somebody could literally say, like, no, we want really tight and intimate. And it was like, okay, well, let's go to Studio B and I'll put you all in the corner and, you know, we'll block it off. But then the next day it could be big, huge, bombastic rock and roll drums in the same room. Right. Not all rooms are like that. You know, not all rooms, like right now, I'm struggling to find rooms that have enough ISO booths to do stuff, you know, because one ISO booth doesn't do it. I need 3. Right. You know, I got a singer, and I got a acoustic bass, and I got drums, and I got a piano, and like everybody wants to play at the same time, and everybody wants to be able to fix it, and so I got to have some kind of isolation. Right. How do I do that? You know, I did. You know, I love East West. I did a record at East West, but I had singers on almost every song, but we knew they were going to be replaced because those songs were going to go out to artists to sing on. So they were guide vocals. So I had I had to keep them out of everything else. Like,
right.
Everybody's like, you're going to get all the leakage into the vocal. I don't care about leakage into the vocal. I'm trying to keep the vocal out because I need to take it out later.
Vocal out of everything
so
else.
I had to put singers. I literally had singers in the lounge, or the control room.
Dang, nice.
Yeah. So, so
That's
it's
awesome.
To get to your question, sometimes it's just you're sculpting the sound by where you're doing it and how you're doing it, and are you doing it live? And for me, a lot of that happens before we get to the session, like I talked about before. It's the preparation. So yes, I do help to sculpt the sound, but it in my way, it's not happening like with an EQ or we're going to use this certain kind of thing, or it's like, where are we going to record and how are we going to do this? Exactly. I'm not the kind of producer that's going to write this. I'm not going to write the song with you and do that.
Course.
I'm not that. I'm not that guy. So I can't help in that way. So I help in the ways that I can. Yeah,
for sure.
So.
I just want to take a quick break and tell you about my free guide for creating massive snare sounds. In it, I go over all my techniques, from drum choices, tuning, microphone placements, even mixing techniques. Check it out now at brendandecora.com/huge snare. And now, back to the show. And can you talk about any current or recent projects that you've been working on that you can talk about?
There's a couple I can't talk about. Somebody asked me one of my favorite sessions that I've ever done. I can't talk about yet. Because it hasn't come out yet.
Yeah.
That's the other thing is now everything is an NDA. You have to sign the NDA for everything.
Yes.
You're not allowed to talk about anything. You can't put anything on.
Yeah.
But recently, I just did a project with Melody Gardot, who I love. She's great.
Nice.
I started working with her with Al, and I just mixed a project. She had done a project. It's an EP, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But it's her and a piano player and a string quartet. And
nice.
I literally got a call out of the blue, like, "Hey, can you mix this for me?" And these 4 songs, and that was really fun because she was coming to LA, so I got to spend time with her. And then they needed an Atmos too, so I got to do both, which was really fun.
Awesome. Nice.
What else am I doing? I just produced this record for this band called Hard Rooster.
Okay.
Which is kind of a country rock band, and they're kind of weekend warrior guys, but they're really good. So they all have day jobs, but and that was really fun. I got brought in as kind of the guy to like, hey, we want to make a record. We heard you're good at this, through mutual friends, and they wanted to have fun doing it. So a lot of their one of the things was like, we want to do this and we want to make a good record, but we also want an experience to do it. So we literally spent a day, Paula Salvatore and I spent a day, and we took them around to a bunch of studios so they could see, which, we took them to Village and Sunset, and, these are the rooms we can do this in, and these, and then we talked about it, and like, okay, we want to do the tracking here, and we want to do the overdubs here. It's like, okay, great. And then I'll mix it at my house. It'll be fun. They wanted to get, we had 2 days of tracking and 2 days of overdubs. And they were like, if we can get 4 songs, this will be great. Right. Nice. And I was like, well, bring more. Like,
you guys are well rehearsed. If we can get 4, but I was like, make sure you have more. We got 9 songs done the first day. Amazing. Nice.
I think we got 6 the first day and 3 the next day or something like that.
Okay.
So what started out as an EP ended up being a full album.
Nice. But did you run into problems with the overdubs then? Did that drag out longer because there's more songs? No, because they were good and they were rehearsed. They were good.
And
awesome.
Nice. When they're good, they're good. The singer was great. He would walk out and he'd sing it 3 times. It was like, great, cool,
nice,
we're good.
Awesome.
I mean, it didn't need a ton of overdubs. It wasn't like,
Gotcha.
I mean, again, kind of a country rock thing. So the songs were really good. They were there. They had their parts together. They'd been playing them, and we kind of had a plan going in, and it took a couple hours to get set up and get sounds and stuff like that. Get the headphones working and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Get the lunch order happening.
Exactly. All that stuff. But then again, and that's the way I like it. Take the first song's going to take a little bit of time, whatever.
Right.
But then you just go. You're just go.
Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, yeah, you run into a little thing here. Oh, we need different acoustic guitar sound. Great. We'll get a different acoustic guitar sound. It's not
nice.
Keep it moving.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it's fun. I don't like those records where you're laboring over stuff and like.
Yeah.
I
for sure.
doing vocals for years and stuff like that. It's like that's not
right.
It's just not
editing.
Fun. It's not fun.
Comping syllables and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can do it. We've all done it, but it's not fun. It's really not fun.
Right.
One of the great things about working at Capitol is usually, Capitol, like East West, not the least expensive studio in the world.
Definitely not.
So, but and the people I was working with are not the least expensive. So usually by the time you can afford to do that,
right,
you kind of it weeds out a lot of the riffraff. Let's put it that way. We still got a certain amount of it, but for the most part, we were doing quote unquote real sessions. Very rarely was I cutting a demo. I mean, I don't even think that's a thing anymore. Nothing's a demo anymore. Everything's everything's for real these days. But
nice.
But it was very rarely. Were we working on something that wasn't going to be released and heard by people.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Whether or not people heard it, I don't know, but at least it was got out there.
Nice.
But
so I like to wrap up each podcast with the same kind of set of questions. The first one is, what is your most influential teacher?
Oh, my teacher? Well, obviously, it's Al.
Probably obvious,
I mean, yeah. But I mean, so he's the most influential, absolutely, because I spent so much time with him.
Of course.
But it was also, Bill Smith and, Christina Picari and, the other engineers I worked with at Capitol. And, I was really lucky. I got to be an assistant or engineer for some of the best, engineers and producers in the world. So, I have stuff, little things I picked up from Phil Ramone and little things I picked up from Tommy LaPuma and things I picked up from Quincy and things So I'm kind of an amalgamation of all of us are.
Of course.
And those people are the same way, So, nice. But I can draw direct lines to obviously a lot of what I do was influenced by Al, but,
of course.
But there was stuff that, that Elliot Shiner did when I would assist him on mixes that Al would never have done.
Right.
So I can grab that out of the bag when I need it too.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's Al.
Yeah, of course.
Not a bad, nice. not a bad teacher to have.
Not a bad teacher, absolutely. Awesome. The next question is, what is your favorite reference track? If you have to go into a new studio and check out the room, the speakers, what do you put on?
Yeah, it's first one is always it's a record we did with Shelby Lynn.
Okay.
And the song, it's Just a Little Lovin'. It's the first song on that. What's the record called? I think the record is called Just a Little Lovin'.
Okay.
But that album, especially the first song, it starts with a bass and a cross stick, and you can hear the chamber echo, and that's what I use, and that's what I use to tune speakers with, and that's my go-to track. You just hear everything. If her voice is right and sounds good and right in your face, then it just works. Yeah.
Nice, awesome. And last question is, what would be one tidbit for an upcoming engineer?
That's tough. What I like to tell people is don't pigeonhole yourself. When I started, I thought I was gonna be doing X, and I ended up doing Y. Yeah. But I didn't know that Y existed when I started.
Right.
There's tons of jobs in audio. Tons of them that, we only hear about the guy making the rock album or whatever, the jazz record or what, there's 6 guys that we hear about all the time, but there's hundreds of people, thousands of people working in audio. I didn't know, I knew nothing about making movies, scoring, or, you can be a dialogue editor, or you can be, you can do trailers, or you can do, there's so many different jobs in audio that you may not know what you like and what you're really good at until you can discover it.
Right.
You know, I thought I had never seen the sessions at Capitol when I got there. Like, I think I'd maybe seen one string session, you know, and now at Capitol, I was working on them every single day. And I didn't know I liked that because I'd never seen it before. So, so my advice is keep your ears open, keep your eyes open. And, you know, yeah, I want, you know, I hear a lot of kids like, I want to mix. I want to be a mixer. It's like, yeah, mixing's fun. It's great.
Right.
But so is recording, you know, and what are you going to mix? And, you know, who knows? So, you know, just be aware, be open to stuff, learn everything you can. And, you know, if you can find a mentor, somebody to, you know, to hang out with, that's great. I mean, that world kind of doesn't exist that much anymore, but which is too bad.
I found that, you know, like with all my experience, I've done everything. You know, I've worked at East West, I've worked at Glenwood, I've worked a lot of places and done all different types of sessions. Now I am kind of focusing more on mixing and even just kind of sticking with rock in general, but I still draw from all of those experiences when I do that. You know, it's like if someone wants to record an orchestra or mix an orchestra, I can do that because I have all that experience. And, you know, even when I get other kinds of tracks, you know, pop tracks or whatever, I have experience in that too. So it's I'm very grateful that I did explore everything and it was able to lead me to what I wanted, and I can still draw from all those things as well. So, you know.
And I think, like, honestly, there's not much of a difference recording a jazz record and recording a rock record.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
one's
true.
louder.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, recording, you know, Diana Krall and her band and recording the Rolling Stones, you're doing the same stuff. You're putting people out in the room. You're you know, again, good headphone mix, make sure they can hear, make sure they can see, and hit record and let it happen, you know?
Exactly.
So the mentality is the same. Yeah, you might use different mics and you might have, you know, whatever. I mean, there's obviously subtle differences to it, but but conceptually, it's not that much different, you know? So
for sure,
you know, so one feeds the other.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely.
And I just get bored easy, so I like doing all kinds of stuff.
Awesome.
I like that I can be working a video game one day and a pop record the next day and mixing Atmos the next day. And, you know, what is this week? You know, like I said, this week I'm mixing next week I'm recording all week. It's great. You know? So
nice.
Keeps me on my toes. I don't think I could sit in a room by myself just mixing records.
Yeah.
I would
for sure.
I would get bored. Yeah. It happens now. If I sit here too long, I get, you know, uninspired. I'm bored. I gotta go do something else. You know? So,
awesome.
As much as I love it, you still gotta.
I
have to keep myself mentally stimulated. Let's say.
Yes, absolutely. And then that's about, you know, staying creative with it too, because obviously, you know, mixing and engineering is all like we have to be inspired and created as well. So, you know, it's about maintaining that for sure.
Yeah, and sometimes it's. You know, I told my friend yesterday, I was not inspired to work. I ended up working. I had a lot of busy work I could do, but I wasn't in mix. I wasn't in mixing head, you know, for whatever reason. I just wasn't, I didn't. So I did something else, you know, so I prepped all my sessions that today I'll be more a mixing head and I'll mix them today, but
for sure,
you know, I still had stuff to do. So, you know, there's always something to do. You know, clean up your computer, or, you know, read a manual, you know, download a new plugin and play around with that or whatever it is. So, but
awesome.
know, that's the other thing is I don't have maintenance. Like I don't have the staff anymore.
Right.
That's broken. I'll see you tomorrow. Like it'll work tomorrow when I get here. Like that doesn't happen. When my computer doesn't work, it's like, oh crap, I got to fix this now.
Yeah,
I got to figure it out. Like,
exactly.
You know. Damn it. You know, I used to joke like working at home, it's like, where's the people that bring you lunch? It's 1 o'clock. Like,
yep. It's crazy.
I gotta do that myself? Shit.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, spoiled engineers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Sweet, man. Thanks so much for checking out the show. Make sure to subscribe and leave a review or comment. I'll see you next week.